Hello and good morning. It's 11 o'clock on the 4th of July. My name is Jonathan Greenstein. I'm a Director of Business Development and Marketing here at Thistle Initiatives, and welcome to today's webinar, the FCA's Consumer Duty, Consumer Understanding Outcome Q&A panel. Today's session is hosted and presented by Thistle Initiatives and is the third in our four-part series in which we are exploring and answering your questions on the 4 consumer duty outcomes. Now, today's presentation will be delivered by Lorraine Moat, Head of Payment Services, Matthew Williamson, Head of Credit and Mortgages, and Keith Mayner, Compliance and Technical Manager here within Thistle Initiatives. I know we've done it twice now already, but for the people who have not met us before, can we please just go around and do a very quick introduction?
Would you like me to start, Jonathan?
Please do.
Hello, everyone, and good morning. Welcome to the third in our series of these webinars. My name is Lorraine Moat, and I am Head of Payment Services here at Thistle. In the Payment Services team, we have a breadth of understanding of the payment services sector and, of course, all of the regulatory requirements that surrounds that. We provide support to payment institutions, e-money firms, from SC authorization, change of control, various permissions, safeguarding and other audits, as well as providing ongoing compliance support to our clients.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. Matt, if you can go next.
Yeah, no problems at all. Hi all, welcome. As Johnny mentioned, I'm Matthew Williamson. I head up the credit and mortgages team here at Thistle. So as part of the work that we do, they're very similar in terms of services that Lorraine sort of outlined there, but we work with credit firms, whether they be brokers, lenders, credit reference agencies, debt financial wellbeing firms, through to mortgage intermediaries, lenders, as well as work in the insurance space, particularly around intermediaries. So a few different items and work streams there that we focus on.
Thanks, Matt. And Keith, finally, if we get in from yourself, please.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm Keith Mayner. I'm Compliance and Technical Manager for Thistle and its regulated sister firm, Resolution Compliance. I'll provide generalised compliance advice pretty much across the board to our clients and also appointed representatives. And my specialist area is investments, though I do attempt to get involved with each area that we're involved with generally.
Thank you very much, Keith. Moving swiftly along to briefly introduce Thistle Initiatives, we are specialist governance, risk and compliance consultants. Been supporting the financial services industry in the UK now for 10 years. Our team of expert consultants guide firms through the FCA authorization process, provide ongoing support and advice to the full breadth of the regulated financial services industry, and help firms with implementation of new and changing regulations. Now, to discuss today's outcome that we're looking at, I'd like to please ask Matt to please provide a brief introduction to the Consumer Duties Consumer Understanding Outcome.
Absolutely. So I think just to take a snippet here, so that the Consumer Understanding Outcome places the onus on firms to ensure that its communications with its customers transcend clear, fair and not misleading. This means ensuring communications meet the information needs and requirements of the target consumer, and the communications are tailored to factor in characteristics of the target customers. So look, really from the FCA's perspective, and I'd imagine would be shared as something that would be shared amongst a lot of us, but this outcome really sort of embodies consumer duty. The understanding of the particular consumer is incredibly important here, and that comes from pricing through to the risks associated, even understanding the fundamentals of the product. So that's really from I'd say the FCA's perspective, one of the major objectives of implementing consumer duty. I think we'll come on to this further today, but we need to look at and consumer understanding transcending clear, fair and not misleading leads more into being able to demonstrate actually how the consumer understands. So rather than just saying something's clear and fair and isn't misleading, we're actually looking for the ability to demonstrate that we are or that the consumer effectively understands what you're trying to communicate here. So all of this is kind of leading in and supporting the need for good consumer outcomes.
Perfect, Matt. Thank you very much for that. Now, before we begin, I'd like to cover a couple of very brief housekeeping points. So either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you have it configured, you will see a button called Q&A. If you have any questions, please ask them in there. We'll try to get through as many of them as we can at the end of today's discussion. You will also notice a button called Chat. Please do not post questions in the chat function, as this will not be monitored. Now, changing up the format as we've had it over the last 2 sessions, where we have answered your questions, and be rest assured we will be coming to your questions. We know the FCA have listed about 10 questions in terms of this outcome. And what we're going to do is go through 2 of these questions and unpack them as a team, and then come to answering your questions thereafter. So in terms of the first question we're going to be looking at, how are you testing the effectiveness of your communications? How are you acting on these results?
Okay, I think there are various strategies that you can apply to test the effectiveness of your communications. And I know we've mentioned this more than once in previous webinars, but just to repeat, I think one good way of achieving that is through the use of surveys and feedback from your clients. So by soliciting that feedback from your customers or clients, you can hopefully gain some valuable insights just into how well the communications are being received and, of course, understood. And that can be achieved through post-interaction surveys, customer satisfaction surveys, or any type of sort of targeted feedback form, I guess. And I think that, sorry.
No, I was just going to add to that, Lorraine, as well. We've had recently quite a few questions around how do you run these surveys? You know, what sort of questions are we looking to ask? You know, in order to extract meaningful data. And I think one way we've really focused on is sort of by considering the objective of the new product, the communication, whatever it might be, and then trying to feed that back to the customer. So if I take an example of the new pricing structure, a new pricing structure that's being rolled out on the back of hopefully your fair value assessment, and you know there's something positive in terms of change for the customer, rather than asking, you know, generically, do you understand the pricing structure of the product with a yes/no answer, actually, you know, asking a question or framing a question as what was the total cost of the product? That's a really good way of getting, you know, a lot more feedback than just a yes/no answer. So it's making sure from an operational perspective we're considering those things. But Lorraine, to your point, I think it's really important that we, you know, that's a central tenet in order to test.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess what we're saying there, Matt, is let's use more open questions, given the individual the opportunity to opine on and provide their thoughts, rather than a yes no is not going to really tell you too much in the details. So I think that's really helpful. Thank you. I think another way you can address it really is by the use of analytics and metrics. So maybe, for example, if you're tracking metrics such as, depends on your business, of course, but let's say open rates, click-through rates, engagement levels across different communication channels, whether it's email, newsletter, website content and the like, you can start to sort of gauge the effectiveness of the messages that you're trying to get across, and then by analysing those data points, you hopefully be able to reveal some trends and patterns that are going to help you identify any areas for improvement, for example. Another thing you can consider is something what's called A/B testing. So what that involves is creating 2 or maybe more, perhaps, variations of a communication and testing them with different segments of your customer base. So if you compare the sort of performance of each variation, and you can start to determine which one of these is likely to deliver the required outcome. And then, of course, you can play those insights back into your business and use that to optimize future communications. But again, and I know, forgive me, we've mentioned this a few times during the webinars, but monitoring customer inquiries and complaints is a super way of revealing any potential pain points, areas of confusion, which just really provides you with the opportunity, I guess, then to sort of enhance communications, I guess, in many ways.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt, on you go again.
No. I just echo what what you're saying there. I think certainly the complaint side of things after the event is really important, and I think just another after event one, post engagement with or post potential testing of the product or service before it's enrolled is external source testing. So looking at social media, for example, industry forums, Trustpilot, other rating websites, rather than just you looking at the data which you're in control of, and the aspects that you've launched, actually looking at external sources is a really useful way, again, of understanding your consumer understanding points. I think just to touch upon as well, that the how of the testing for all of your points, Lorraine. I think we kind of mentioned post or after event testing, but testing all of this before, testing any communication, product, services, changing customer journey. If we can do that before it's all been rolled out, that's going to minimize any potential harm, or effectively protect the customer as best as we can do. There are always going to be teething things, and that's where the after event aspects come in. I'd say as well, things like group sessions and group forums are really good. So you get good interaction with a number of different individuals or consumers within the group. Not only you get that live feedback, but also actually you can then sort of bottom out and sort of iron out potentially any creases there and then, rather than having to do more or new surveys and becoming an iterative process. So it's another good sort of way of testing, as I said, any product, service, communication, customer journey, etc. So yeah. Sorry if I cut you off a little bit there.
No, not at all. Very, very valuable insight, of course, but thank you. Yeah, I think that's, in terms of that question, that's much.
No, perfect. Yeah. I was going to jump in there because I think we've got quite a few more questions we'd like to cover here today. So next question: how do you adapt your communications to meet the needs of customers with characteristics of vulnerability, and how do you know that these adaptations are effective?
Okay, a really good question, and I know the question of vulnerabilities come up a couple of times in the question rounds that we've done so far. So look, the first thing to do it really is to identify the vulnerable customer segments that may have, or the customers that may have characteristics of vulnerability within your customer base. Now, depend again in your business type and target client base, but could be, are they elderly individuals who've got certain physical, mental disabilities, or low-income groups, even individuals with limited English proficiency, or any other group that may face specific challenges or may require additional support when they're using your products or services. You then, of course, once you've done that, then need to seek to understand the needs of those customers and gain that sort of deeper understanding of the preferences, and if there's any communication barriers. I would also, and I think this goes without saying, don't need me to tell you this, but make sure your communications use clear and plain language, and avoid terminology or jargon. I think we all, myself included, have a tendency to spit out some jargon because it makes sense to us, and sometimes you get sort of confused looks from the other side because it's not as recognizable to them. So I think just be aware of the fact that you might be using technical terms or jargon that might not necessarily make immediate sense to your audience. But overall, just use simple, concise messaging, and messaging that can be understood by customers at varying levels of literacy or language proficiency, whatever that may be. I think also important to consider providing maybe a range of communication channels to accommodate different customer preferences and accessibility needs. Some people are very switched on to technology, other people still are not. And I think by offering multiple channels, you're going to allow customers to choose the method that best suits their needs. And I think if, particularly when you're going through this process, consider the needs of customers such as those maybe that have visual impairments or hearing disabilities, and provide accessible formats, which is maybe large print documents, braille, audio recordings, or closed captions for videos, for example, just to ensure that important information is presented in a format that these customers can easily access. I think another thing would be to consider how you can tailor communications based on individual preferences and needs. That can involve providing options for different font size adjustments, language, as I said, preferences, or just offering personalised assistance through customer service representatives who are trained to understand and support your vulnerable customers. But the second part of the question that the FCA posed was, but okay, that's great, but how are you going to know these changes are in fact effective? Now, again, customer feedback is really important here, just in terms of analysing that to see whether in fact you could make any improvements. But you may also be able to seek external validation, and I know in a past life when I worked in the industry, this was something that the firm I worked for did quite well. They kind of collaborated with certain consumer advocacy groups or organisations that represent vulnerable customers or certain cohorts of vulnerable customers, and their particular expertise and perspective can often provide you with real valuable insights and also help you to understand how you can be effective in communications and how you can adapt accordingly. So I think in a nutshell, I'd say it's just all about continuous evaluation and improvement, and based on customer feedback and, of course, data analysis, I guess.
Great. I'd just add as well on the perhaps off topic slightly, but still very much focusing on vulnerable customers. What we found, or the firms that we found that have been able to evidence that they've got a good vulnerable customers framework have been able to effectively recognise vulnerable customers and then manage those vulnerable customers. We'll come on to it a little bit more in the webinar next week, but I think having the ability to recognise vulnerable customers from a top-down perspective, having effective training distributed across those that are dealing with or potentially dealing with vulnerable customers, then the management as well. So having ways of flagging vulnerable customers, understanding what the vulnerabilities are and how you would deal with those in those circumstances, as well as potentially having a vulnerable customers champion. So a little bit, as I said, sort of moving into next week, but still really important points and kind of supplements there, everything that you've picked up on, Lorraine.
Yep, that's great. Yeah, absolutely.
Great, perfect. Next question, and that now just to say that concludes the looking at the FCA's questions, and we'll go into audience questions. How can we guard against overwhelming the customer with information when looking to implement the consumer understanding outcome? Keith, perhaps this is one you'd like to take.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jonathan. This is a very pertinent question, and really does, I think, also feed back to the previously mentioned and live topics of vulnerable customers. As ever, with these kinds of queries, we have reference to the FCA's reasonably recent final guidance on the Consumer Duty and its implications, which has been out a while, but is very much, I think, commended to anybody who's looking for answers on how to approach Consumer Duty. The particular guidance gives quite a few specific hints about overwhelming, providing excessive information, particularly where customers may have elements of vulnerability in their makeup. I can mention a few of those particular areas. This is all to do with presentation and relates back to what Matt emphasised in his speech about clear, fair and not misleading, the general requirement for communications and financial promotions. The FCA talks about a few specific things. Chief amongst those are what it calls layering, which is really prioritising. So there's a need for firms to prioritise key information up front and find a way of linking that to information of secondary importance, if you will, which is somehow linked to or is provided on a secondary platform, a secondary area of text. So that's really very important, because it's been identified that consumers do tend to rely very heavily on the first piece of information they encounter when they're making financial decisions, and you've got to make sure that that first piece of information is the key stuff, because one needs to be mindful that attention spans again are quite limited. Another aspect is coherence. You've got to provide information that's coherent and consistent with any other documentation that the customer or potential customer has access to. That's vital. That's got to be an effective way of presenting that information. Beyond that, and this is so key, is what the FCA terms engagement. Firms need to design their comms in such a way that consumers are able to engage with them. This relates to various identified problems in the customer base, lack of financial literacy, short attention spans, often vulnerability, as we've said. Engagement is all, and where customers can't be engaged, it's likely to be very difficult to keep their attention, certainly on anything complex or even in mass market investments. The other things that will be worth mentioning are really flow on from what's previously been mentioned, but getting the right level of detail. You need to know what the appropriate level of detail for any communication is and apply it. Simplicity, logical flow, avoidance of jargon, avoidance of technical terms, all of those help, as the FCA points out to us, to build consumers' trust. I think that this is quite a complex area, I think, Jonathan, but I think that's what I would use to sum up the requirements in general terms.
No, Keith, that was very, very useful, and thank you very much for your insight there. Moving on to the next question, in order to evidence consumer understanding effectively, what innovative methods or strategies can we employ to go beyond traditional practices? Who wants to say that? Yeah, go by all means.
Jump in on that one. Right, I think that's a really good question, because I think, like, up until now, I think the steps that we've been discussing, I guess, are relatively straightforward. We're talking about looking at complaints, looking at, you know, your customer interactions, but I think looking at how you can do that more innovatively, particularly, I think, if you're a slightly smaller firm as well, maybe having, you know, customer client forums is not really going to work for you. There's other things you can do, but let's just maybe have a look at some of what we've started to see already from clients, the sort of more versatile and innovative ways, I guess, of achieving the same effect. For example, some clients have been using what they've described as like interactive and sort of gamified learning. So that's where a firm develops sort of digital platform and mobile applications that educate customers or consumers about their products. So particularly from a payment services perspective, this has worked. So they use that to through sort of gamified learning experiences, incorporating quizzes, simulations, and interactive tutorials. That means that consumers can actively engage with the content and then at the same time enhance their understanding and, of course, depending on your learning style, retention of that key information, which I think is really important. Another clever method that we've seen in the payment services world is sort of more multimedia presentations. So the use of videos or animations to help explain maybe more complex concepts or processes, for example. And I think that visual storytelling can be quite an engaging way to simplify information, and also is really good at capturing a person's attention and making it sort of easier for them to comprehend and remember the important details. Some very clever firms are gone as far as using virtual reality or augmented reality, using that technology to sort of create more immersive experiences that simulate different payment scenarios or can showcase potential risks and challenges, and just allowing the customer to explore a more sort of virtual environment that they can get more of a hands-on experience. And I suppose better understand the implications and their understanding of a product. But also something just as simple as a personalised dashboard. So providing your customer with a dashboard that offers real-time insight into the product service you're providing, their activities around that, maybe transaction histories, the fees, the usage patterns. And I think by visualising their own data and playing that back to them, it just helps them, I guess, be able to more fully understand, get a deeper understanding of the product and service that you're providing. There's many other things I could say, and I'll not go into too much detail in case we run out of time, but there's chatbot bots and AI-powered assistants that can help. But even something as more basic as infographics, just creating that visually appealing sort of story and presentation of information in a sort of concise, easily understandable format using icons, charts, diagrams, etc. I think that can turn those complex concepts into something a lot more simplified. One last thing I'll say on that, I remember when implementing innovative methods and strategies, it's really important just to make sure you strike a balance between the creativity of all of that and, of course, the regulatory compliance objectives that you've got, and just being careful that you ensure to communicate something that still remains clear, still accurate, and compliant with whatever regulation and consumer protection standards, of course, that you're having to comply with. So hopefully that answers that question. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. Now, I mentioned earlier that this is the third installment in our four-part series. The remaining session is taking place on the 12th of July. If you're yet to sign up for the final session of the series, we'll be sending a link to all attendees following the session. Additionally, you can watch the first and second sessions on the products and services on our website now. We'll include a link to this in the follow-up email with the recording of the session. Now, finally, like in previous webinars that we've done on this topic, we are extending our offer to all attendees to get our suite of consumer duty documentation at a significantly discounted price. As a quick reminder to everyone who's heard it before, and to inform people who have not heard it yet, you can get access to our comprehensive consumer duty implementation plan and our template consumer duty policy. Now, these documents are not a one-size-fits-all for any firm type. We have specific documents ready for payment services, investment firms, and credit mortgages and insurance firms as well. Now, usually priced at £2,600 plus VAT. All attendees from the session can get the documents at a discounted half price of £1,300 plus VAT. And further details of this will be sent in the follow-up email. Now, our team can support you with implementation support and guidance of the consumer duty. The expert consultants here can assist with consumer duty arrangements, implementation support, framework reviews, and ongoing support. Now, if you want to book a free consultation with us, please respond to the email and let us know. We can book in that meeting. I would like to thank all attendees on today's session for joining us for this interesting discussion. Also like to thank Lorraine, Matt, and Keith as well for giving us their time to talk about this topic here today. As a quick reminder, this webinar has been recorded and we'll be putting the recording online soon. Please go and follow Thistle Initiatives on LinkedIn to see when it becomes available to watch. Thank you and have a great day.